With the Venmo debit card, you can Venmo everything. Your favorite band's merch? You can Venmo this. Or their next show? You can Venmo that. Visit Venmo.me/debit to learn more. The Venmo MasterCard is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A. pursuant to license by MasterCard International Incorporated. Card may be used everywhere MasterCard is accepted. Venmo purchase restrictions apply.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Hey everyone. This episode contains more than a few F-bombs, but those F-bombs are referring to the official Senate record. So what can you do? Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the machinery the Trump administration is putting in place. Things that are going to be hard to simply shut down. Things we might feel the consequences of for years. One of these pieces of machinery is the federal judiciary. Federal judges get appointed for life. And Jay Willis, over at Balls and Strikes, he says 6 months in, we're beginning to get a feel for who exactly this new administration wants to put on the bench.
There's a conservative activist who described the White House as looking, and I'm quoting here, for even more bold and fearless judicial nominees. And this is a euphemism functionally for both loyalists and, to a certain extent, trolls.
If describing these arbiters of our legal system as trolls feels extreme to you, bear in mind, these folks are certainly stretching the limits of fair and balanced. One nominee got asked a basic question. Was the Capitol attacked by a violent mob on January 6th, 2021? She said that was too political to answer, and that she herself couldn't say because she wasn't in Washington that day. Then there's the standard response the nominees seem to be giving about the 2020 election.
They answer the question in a very specific and lawyerly way. They say, Congress certified the 2020 election for Joe Biden, who served 4 years as president.
Which is true.
That is absolutely true. It is true that Congress certified the election for Joe Biden. But they're not saying Biden won.
It's a lawyerly troll.
Absolutely. They are aligning themselves, with these stolen election conspiracy theories that are table stakes, basically, for anyone who aspires to a career in Republican politics.
I kind of feel like Trump trying to influence the federal judiciary is old news because, of course, in his first term, he inherited this uncommonly long list of judicial vacancies, partially because some vacancies were kept open for him by political allies.
That's right.
Why is this different?
I think it's different because the kinds of lawyers he's appointing to the judiciary would have no business becoming federal judges, even in the previous Trump administration. The through line for all of them is either loyalty to him or a willingness to adopt positions that convey that loyalty.
Today on the show, Donald Trump already reshaped the federal judiciary once. This time, he's hoping to really break the mold. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise, or wherever you listen. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are the things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it. So your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations. Jay, I wanted to talk to you now because this week, the Senate Judiciary Committee is expected to vote on one particular Trump judicial nominee who's become especially controversial. And this nominee also encapsulates, I think, for me, what's been going on with Trump and the judiciary more generally. The nominee's name is Emil Bove, and he's up for an appointment to the Third Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. Tell me about Emil Bove and where his nomination is.
So I talked earlier about how, with increasing frequency to a greater degree than before, the people Trump is nominating to these judicial vacancies would have no business being a federal judge in any other administration. And Emil Bove is a great, illustration, encapsulation of that. He went to law school, obviously, did a couple of clerkships after law school.
That seems like par for the course.
Yeah, and then he was a federal prosecutor in New York. And after he left government service, he went into white-collar defense work. But he wasn't just any white-collar criminal defense lawyer. He was Trump's criminal defense lawyer throughout the Biden administration.
He worked on Trump's hush money trial, the New York case?
That's right. There are so many lawyers like Emil Bove who are, living a comfortable life, billing their time at $1,000 an hour, and commuting an hour each way to work on Metro North. But because he was Trump's defense lawyer, he gets fast-tracked, really, into positions of power within the legal system. And after Trump won the election, he rewarded Bove with a gig at the Department of Justice, where over the first couple months of the Trump administration, Bove basically functioned as Trump's hatchet man there. He was instrumental in firing the January 6 prosecutors and then ordering his old office, the Southern District of New York, to drop its ongoing criminal case against Eric Adams in exchange for Adams's cooperation with Trump's immigration agenda.
Huh.
And to give you a sense of the kind of character that Bove is, there's a fired career Department of Justice lawyer who has now come forward as a whistleblower, who has alleged that when discussing the possibility of a court order preventing the White House from shipping immigrants off to El Salvador, Bove discussed the possibility that they would have to tell the court to, and I'm quoting here, to fuck off.
We should say that Bove denied this in his hearings, right?
So for the most part, at his confirmation hearing, Bove stonewalled. He refused to answer questions about most of what he did at the Justice Department. He did acknowledge that he told Department of Justice lawyers to fight hard for the Trump administration, and he said he often conveyed the importance of keeping these deportations moving. But when asked specifically if he ever told anyone at DOJ,
well, did you suggest telling the courts fuck you in any manner?
I don't recall.
You just don't remember that. Well, let me ask you.
I should bump in and say this whistleblower lawyer, he's interesting to me on his own because he was the lawyer who came forward and was like, oh, we made a mistake with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We shouldn't have sent him to El Salvador. And that became incredibly controversial for the Trump administration, and it's part of the reasoning for him being fired. But it seems like all along the way, he was taking notes, he was keeping a record, and now that this guy, Emil Bove, is up for this judicial nomination, he just has all these receipts showing here's how you behaved when you were in charge of me.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show the extent to which people in Bove's orbit have been wary and skeptical of him. And, nobody cares. At Bove's hearing, Senate Republicans really kind of closed ranks around Bove. All of their questions for him were basically in the form of, Tell us why you're such a good lawyer, Emil Bove. This should be embarrassing for the Senate Republicans to be defending, but that is not how they are treating the nomination, at least thus far.
And Bove's not the only judicial nominee who's in this position of being someone who's pretty out there, pretty transparently. Like, you've also written about another nominee, Ed Artow, who's currently a state judge in Florida. He's up for a federal district nomination in Florida. You speculate part of the reason he even got the potential nod here is that he did some unusual moves on the bench, basically auditioning. What did he do? What stood out to you?
So again, I don't blame anyone for not having heard of Ed Artow before, but he's less interesting because of who he is than why we know his name in the first place. His resume is the resume of someone who's had a successful legal career. He's currently a state appeals court judge in Florida, but according to his disclosures to the Senate Judiciary Committee, for the past couple of years, he's sort of been sniffing around for a federal judgeship. He's been making his interest known to the office of Florida Senator Rick Scott. And this is how getting a federal judgeship works. You curry favor with your home state senators and you wait for the right moment. And as it so happened, at the time, he is part of a panel that is deciding Trump's state court lawsuit against the Pulitzer Board. Trump had sued the Pulitzer Board after it refused Trump's demand to rescind awards it had given to the New York Times and the Washington Post about Russia's involvement in the 2016 election.
Okay, so first of all, this lawsuit seems bananas to me. But anyway, moving on.
I share your opinion, and Ed Artow made clear his own view on the subject.
He disagrees with us, I think.
I think so. So in February, Artow is on this 3-judge panel that resolved pretty uninteresting early procedural development in the case. But Artow goes out of his way to write this extremely thirsty concurring opinion. He calls on the Supreme Court to overturn New York Times v. Sullivan. That's a 1964 case in which the court created broad First Amendment protections for journalists who report on the conduct of public officials. It is a completely gratuitous opinion. It has no impact on the outcome of the case, but it maybe got him noticed by the right people. Because it turns out, again, this is according to Artow's own disclosures, around that time, he had recently reiterated his interest in a federal judgeship to Scott and to Florida's other senator, also a Republican, Ashley Moody. And on February 27th, about 2 weeks after he published that concurring opinion, sure enough, he sat down for an interview with the White House counsel's office. A couple months later, he says he met personally with Trump, and then Trump formally nominated him a day later.
Is it usual for the president to meet with potential district court nominees?
No, it is pretty unusual for presidents to be involved in a nomination like this. I mean, it's just not how the real world works. I think the bottom line is if you're an ambitious Republican lawyer, it's a pretty safe bet that if you write a concurrence, that quotes Trump's phony witch hunt tweets, that's going to get you noticed. That's going to bump your name to the top of the list.
I'm noticing something in our conversation about Emil Bove and Ed Artow. Both of these guys seem like they were functioning as regular, degular Republican lawyers, and in the case of Artow, judges. And then something happened where all of a sudden they're just out there, being their full selves or whatever. What is going on here?
Becoming a judge has always been, a political process, but I don't think it's ever been this transparently transactional. The way that you get on the short list for a judgeship, you go to a good law school, you take a leadership role in your local bar association, you work for a well-regarded firm, maybe you do some teaching on the side, right? That sort of thing. In previous administrations, people who wanted to become judges would not risk doing something like what Ed Artow did here, because pulling stunts like this used to invite hard questions about, the extent to which you had conflicts of interest. And I think Artow and Bove have shown that you can answer these questions either truthfully or persuasively, but not necessarily both. But people who want nominations from Trump, they have no reason to hide the ball anymore, to have concerns about what their actions will look like. Because creating these conflicts of interests, it's not a red flag. It's the smartest way of getting what you want, getting noticed.
We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Americans United for Separation of Church and State. The future of religious freedom is at a crossroads. The same groups behind Project 2025 are working relentlessly to impose a Christian nationalist agenda on the laws and the lives of the American people. The wall between church and state is the last safeguard standing in their way. For over 75 years, Americans United has been a powerful but quiet force fighting to preserve church-state separation, freedom without favor, and equality without exception for every single American. Americans United stands up for your right to believe and to live as you choose, so long as you don't harm others. Whether you care about gender-affirming health care, reproductive freedom, LGBTQ+ rights, or supporting public schools, church-state separation is fundamental to nearly every constitutional freedom. Americans United exists to protect that separation. You can take action and join Americans United today by donating any dollar amount, and your support will be doubled. Join Americans United and help defend the fundamental freedoms that protect us all. Learn more and join the fight at au.org/slate. au.org/slate.
Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise, or wherever you listen.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Part of what I'm interested in talking to you about is how much we know about how these nominees might actually rule once they get into their chambers, assuming that they do. Because the Senate does ask these guys a bunch of questions about their beliefs about the Constitution. Like, I'm really curious what they say about something like birthright citizenship, which is an active question coming before judges and the Supreme Court at this point. What are they saying in these answers that's notable, or maybe hints at what their eventual power might mean?
Well, like most judicial nominees, these Trump nominees have tried to say as little as possible, because the more you talk as a judicial nominee, the greater the risk you run that you'll say something that gets you in trouble. But the extent to which they are ducking questions on the grounds that the question is political, or that the question seeks to, elicit their opinion about a legal issue that might come before them, I think is pretty ominous. So, for example, some of the Democratic senators have asked these nominees about, what do you think about birthright citizenship, for example? And these nominees will all say, that is something that is being actively litigated right now. 20 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, is this an answer that 20 years ago would have been given to a question like this?
No, it's ludicrous. I mean, 20 years ago, there is no serious argument that the Constitution does not guarantee birthright citizenship. It is right there in the text of the 14th Amendment. The legal effort to question birthright citizenship is very much retconned. It is not part of the mainstream. It has not been any serious lawyer's understanding of birthright citizenship for more than a century. But the people who are getting nominated now are giving answers that at least suggest, that they are open to the possibility of deciding that the Constitution does not mean what it says.
I know that the GOP controls the Senate, but when I hear you say something like that, I just think, where are the Democrats in this? Like, I know they're part of this process. Like, that's a big deal that there's been such a giant shift in what the GOP believes the Constitution to mean, that this question that once would have been answered in a radically different way is now kind of open for debate. So when a nominee comes before the Senate and says something like, oh, yeah, can't really talk about birthright citizenship, that's an active issue, what do the Democrats say?
Hard question, because the Senate Democrats, as they so often are, have kind of been all over the place on judicial nominees. I was pretty critical of their performance at the first confirmation hearing for Trump's first slate of nominees. Multiple Democratic senators on the Judiciary Committee did not even show up for the hearing for Whitney Hermendorfer, Trump's nominee to a seat on the Sixth Circuit.
Did they have a good excuse?
If they have provided any excuse, I haven't heard it.
Huh.
Traditionally the way it works is appeals court nominees go first, and then district court nominees come after that. Only 2 Democratic senators asked any questions of the district court nominees. And, it's true that Democrats don't have the votes, right, to stop any of these nominees themselves. But the shortcoming of their strategy is they're not even giving themselves an opportunity to pick off 1 or 2 of them. The most interesting answers, the most damning answers, in my view, that any of these nominees provided to questions, questions about the 2020 election, for example, they came in response to written questions from Senate Democrats, which the lawmakers submitted after the hearing was over. And submitting questions for the record is not a substitute for confronting these nominees face-to-face, in person, while the C-SPAN cameras are rolling, by allowing the nominees to instead, carefully workshop their answers to these questions and provide them in written form in a PDF document that goes on the Senate Judiciary Committee's website. That's basically the same as giving nominees a pass.
Yeah, here's what bugs me about this. Like, we have a recent example of a particularly extreme Trump nominee, not for judge, but for U.S. attorney in D.C., getting tanked. This is a guy named Ed Martin. And, it's a little unclear to me how all that went down. But I do think that he received a lot of attention for what he did when he was in an acting capacity as U.S. attorney. And then all of the things he tweeted, all of the things he said about January 6th, among other things. And it did end up making a difference, as far as I can tell. But if you don't make any noise, there's no chance of making a difference.
Yeah, I will say that the Senate Democrats were more prepared for Emil Bove's hearing. They showed up to it, first of all, big improvement. And they did ask hard questions of him. I want to shout out Pete Welch, who asked Bove in person, who won the 2020 election.
What did he say?
Oh, that's a political question. As a judicial nominee, it would be inappropriate for me to express an opinion about that. Express an opinion about, what's on Wikipedia.
Yikes.
I'm glad that Senate Democrats are maybe learning from their mistakes in the first hearing, but going forward, that has to be the rule, not the exception. Like, for better or for worse, part of being a politician, especially part of being a politician in the minority, is you have to put on a show a little bit. You have to put enough fodder out there that can maybe peel off 4 Republican votes.
So you and I were talking Thursday, July 10th. Just this morning, more information came out about Emil Bove, this nominee we've been talking about, who's supposed to be voted on this week. This is like a trove of texts and emails, basically confirming in real time that Bove was encouraging DOJ attorneys to ignore judicial rulings and trying to keep that out of the record, encouraging lawyers to only communicate by phone, not create a record of what they're saying, which is always a red flag. Do you think any of this is going to have an impact on what happens this week?
So the texts that are getting out as we report this, they sure look like sort of contemporaneous evidence of what this whistleblower has alleged that Bove said. They're texts of lawyers who are talking about Bove's little fuck you speech in a way that suggests, it was common knowledge among Department of Justice lawyers that this was the boss's position. This is the kind of thing that, should torpedo a judicial nomination, that probably would torpedo a nomination in any other administration. I just don't know that it's going to make a difference at this point. Tom Tillis, the Republican senator from North Carolina, who has announced that he won't seek re-election, he's already said that he'll probably vote to advance Bove's nomination. This is the same Republican Senate that confirmed Pete Hegseth, the Fox News host, as the Secretary of Defense. So that's the bar that these nominees have to clear.
What do you think the U.S. judiciary is going to look like in 5 years' time? I mean, right now, we're living in a world where the judiciary is routinely ruling against Donald Trump. Even people Trump appointed the first time around, Republican judges, and they're writing in strong terms about what they're saying. What do you think after the next 4 years this judiciary will look like as a group?
On the one hand, there are fewer nominations for Trump to fill this time around than there were in 2016. But less important, I think, than the volume of Trump judges is the types of people who are going to be filling those seats. Because it only takes a couple of judges, right? You only need a couple of votes on, a Fifth Circuit panel, for example, to move the law in the direction that the conservative legal movement would prefer. And I think that's the reason that I have so many concerns about what Trump is doing to the federal judiciary, because judges have life tenure. So these are people who have the ability to implement Trump's agenda long after he leaves office, long after he leaves politics. To the extent that voters, reject Trumpism at some point in the hypothetical future, they can't reject Trump's judges who are confirmed for life. They are going to be there for as long as they feel like it, and there is basically no realistic way to remove them from office.
Jay, thanks for coming on the show, I guess. That's a depressing place to end it.
I appreciate it as always. Thank you for having me.
Jay Willis is the editor-in-chief of Balls and Strikes. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Madeline Ducharme, and Ethan Oberman. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.